Welcome to Professor Game Podcast, where we interview successful practitioners of games, gamification, and game thinking who brings the best of their experiences to get ideas, insights, and inspiration that help us in the process of getting the students to learn what we teach. And I'm Rob Alvarez. I teach and work at IE Business School in Madrid, where we create interactive and engaging learning materials. Want to know more? Go to professorgame.com/subscribe, start on our email list, and ask me anything. Engagers, and today we have Naomi Pariseault. Naomi, the first thing we want to know is if you're prepared to engage.
I am absolutely ready.
Let's do this. Let's go. So Naomi here is an instructional designer of the School of Professional Studies at Brown University in the United States. And as with many other instructional designers, it was a fortunate happenstance that Naomi stumbled into the field and has been happily inspiring student learning since 2011. She loves to experiment with new design approaches, and I'm guessing that that's how she arrived to gamification. It's been a dream to blend together the principles of game design and with learning to create gamified courses. Growing up, she loved playing classic video games and could be found playing Atari Asteroids with her dad or Super Mario 64 and Kirby with her cousin. Naomi has earned both level 1 and 2 certifications of Sententia Gamification, and she didn't put this in her intro, but I am going to add it. She is one of the winners of the Gamification Awards in the Gamification of Learning conference in Chicago that we had with Sententia Gamification. So, publicly, congratulations on that, Naomi. I don't know if I've missed anything from your intro.
Oh, no, that's everything and more. Thank you so much. It was the greatest honor to receive that award and be recognized by my peers, especially, or the judging group and the conference. I mean, just really incredible.
It is indeed. So again, congratulations on that. But before we get started with one of the gamification questions, we want to know, Naomi, what does like a regular day, if there's such a thing, look like in your life?
Oh, so a regular day in my life is often very irregular, but I feel like my work and my day follows very particular patterns that replicate themselves week to week. So often I will be up at faculty offices meeting with faculty to discuss their courses, their designs, revisions, you name it, everything about course design. And I'll often go up to the faculty to meet with them, which is nice. So I get some exercise. And our faculty offices are up a giant hill. So that's a really interesting geographical element to my world is hiking up to see faculty. But I also spend a lot of time in meetings with various team members here at the School of Professional Studies. And I also spend part of my time at my desk, working very hard to make all of the dreams actually happen at a tactile standpoint. So I'm kind of all over the place, but I'm thankful for that. And I'm not just stuck at my desk all day.
It provides quite a bit of variety, I'm sure, and the hiking keeps your body energized.
Yes, it does.
So Naomi, can you tell us a story of something that we like to call our favorite failure or fail attempt, first attempt in learning? When, creating an instructional design course, especially if it involved one or other game designs or gamification. And of course, something that actually you learned something from and that probably set you up for future successes like the one we already mentioned.
Yes. So I actually do have an example that relates to a game or gamification experience. So what's really interesting about when you're working through a gamification process is you start to realize certain dependencies. And sometimes you realize those dependencies a little bit later on after you've already done the design and actually built things. So one thing we had decided to do in a gamified course that I designed, the very first undergraduate full semester online gamified course, Fantastic Places, Unhuman Humans, we realized that the game mechanics either needed to be built into the design of the course itself or into the facilitation in some way. And so with the facilitation, that's either manual or we could find some auto magic way to make that happen. And auto magic, it could be a technical tool, or we simulate that. But regardless of how that happens, we really ran out of time to make the auto magicness happen. And so we were stuck having a manual implementation of a couple of the key elements of the course. And so what that meant was bringing the TAs on board to understand the ethos of the course and actually implement those game mechanics. And what that also meant was adding a huge manual workload onto the TAs. So we kind of had to get their buy-in.
Just a quick interruption. TAs,
Yes.
for those of you who might be wondering, is a teaching assistant. Am I right?
Yes, it is. Thank you. Thank you. I don't want to exclude anyone. The teaching assistants, yes. So our teaching assistants were incredible and they were absolutely on board, but we created a ton of work for them. So we were asking them to manually track the levels and badges that students were receiving, which meant like some spreadsheets, and not every student was achieving every level at the same time in the course. So that meant, some students could be at level 5 and some students could be at level 2. It was all about how students pursued the levels. So that was really interesting. And when we were meeting with the TAs to talk with them about that, we realized that that was a really important component of the course, but also kind of just a really stressful amount of work for them to accurately track those pieces. And because a lot of the students are high achievers and also are like motivated by saving and status to some regard, these elements really matter to the students. So when things were out of sync, the students were really bummed out that, hey, I didn't get my last level, and they would be the ones reminding the TAs about where they were at. So we realized that it's really, really important to make sure that you're designing something that's going to be scalable and effective.
That's a key learning, but I also want to highlight something that I think is good out of that experience, and it's the fact that you didn't start with building it all together to then realize that you actually had to change it all together. So I'm sure that you got some lessons learned beyond the automation from that, and that there were some even if small tweaks. It was also useful to, and I've heard this very much from people who are into entrepreneurship as well. That you want to scale and be able to scale many times, but there's things that you might want to do that don't scale, and it's testing out by yourself with your own hands, with your TAs or with your professor to actually be testing and checking all these things. So I think it was actually sort of an iteration with your students, Naomi. Wouldn't you say something like that?
Yes, that is absolutely on point.
So again, is there something that you would like to highlight as a key learning for you in your experience from that creation of that course?
Oh, that's a really, really excellent question. I think one of the most interesting and empowering things about designing that course was we had done so much work in the design and mapping that we felt really empowered to have the philosophy of we're just making this up, when in reality we weren't. But we had a lot of freedom to, if we decided to go in a certain direction or we realized something, we're like, oh, we forgot about this element of the course. We were able to just fold it into the story or fold it in to the design in a way that it felt natural and kind of write around it so that component worked in the course. So I think it was a really, really amazing and fascinating experience because we had done so much front-end work with mapping and making decisions.
That's very cool, very cool. And again, if we take a 180-degree spin, and instead of going for a fail, we would go for something like actually a massive success or a big challenge that you faced and you solved using gamification. I'm thinking that maybe it has to do with the same situation because it actually got an award for the great job that you did. So what would be, if it's that one, it's that one. If it's another example that you wanna talk about, but an example of where you actually went through a massive challenge and came out with a nice success you would like to show off.
Yeah, that's another great question. So I would like to use that same example just because there's so many layers of complexity, and we learned so much in designing a 16-week gamified course that will sustain student interest and just get students very excited about the work and want more, I think is just something that's really incredible and inspiring. So I'm so fortunate to have worked on that course. So one of the most interesting challenges actually stemmed out of the Professor Jim Egan's experience with teaching this course in a face-to-face environment. So he asks students to do stuff that is challenging and out of the box when it comes to assignments. He asks them often to push their understanding of what a text is or what reading is to better understand analysis. He's a literature professor. So one of the items that Professor Egan asks students to do is to use an online visualization tool that does text analysis by words and phrases and proximity of words. So he'll ask students to take a machine-readable text, plug it in a tool online, and then read, I'm putting that in quotations, the text without actually having gone through and read the text traditionally, and I'll also put traditionally in quotations. So students were always a little bit baffled, but ready to take on a challenge with this assignment. But he always got some pushback in class, like, well, why are we doing this? This is so strange and different. And it just felt very unnatural to students. And not that they would push back, but it was just a really, really different and challenging way to experience literature. So what I heard from Jim was this is a challenge for students and might have impeded or slowed down their learnings, that acceptance component. So we actually built that acceptance component into the storyline of the course. And we said, oh, okay, if this is something that students stumble upon or scratching their head, let's make this feel more natural. So one of the main characters of the course, Layla, she is from another planet. And she's a humanoid, so she actually speaks and understands in numbers. She's a very analytical thinker. So we ask students to do the visualizations because that would help her understand the literature better, because it's visualized and it's with numbers and it's in a medium that she better understands. And we didn't have the same experience. Professor Egan said it was completely different. Students weren't questioning the why anymore for that assignment. They were only thinking about the how and the other layers of why that particular analysis matters. So I thought that was an incredible, interesting challenge and a really big win.
Wow, that's super, super interesting. And it's, again, a way of bringing something through gamification and theming it. I mean, that was literally just bringing in a storyline and a theme. I mean, the course had a lot more complexities around it, but that specific challenge that was faced and solved, again, using gamification through theme and narrative, you can see the power of how the students, instead of challenging the why, they are challenged by challenging the why, they are actually challenged on how to do the how. So you're completely flipping the script and doing something amazing. So that's a fantastic story. What would you say, Naomi, is something that we could extend from that experience, or that you learned from that and you would be able to apply it in future designs?
Yeah, absolutely. I think that it's really, really incredibly helpful to ask the subject matter expert, your collaborator, whomever you're working on the situation with. It doesn't have to be a course. It could be anything. It could be a webinar. It could be, anything really. But find out what has been working really well in the past and try to enhance that, and look at what hasn't been working as well, or what's a challenge, or maybe an interesting observation, and then try to build the gamification mechanics, storyline, whatever component would best resonate with that. Try to build the design around that to support or mitigate the strengths or weaknesses. I'm always fascinated to hear what's working really well, or what would you like to be able to do better or differently with faculty? Because I think oftentimes when I'm designing with them, we're taking their face-to-face courses and translating and transforming them to online, a completely different medium. And I'm often able to mitigate or enhance certain things with how we choose to do design.
That's fantastic, and it's a fantastic way to reapply the things that you've learned. And so thank you very much for that story as well. Finally, Naomi, I know that you are a Sententia certified journey woman. Is that the term that you would use?
Yes, it is.
So I don't know if it's only what you've learned from Sententia, other things, but we would like to know if you have any sort of process when you're creating these gamified environments or these gamified courses or similar. What process? What's your thought process? How do you implement these things? Can you run us through how would that process look like for you today, and perhaps if you had brought a new project tomorrow, how would you face it?
Yeah, that's another great question as well. So what was interesting about going through the Sententia certification process was thinking through gamification design, but coming back to Rhode Island and Brown University, I'm sitting here like, well, how am I going to have this process run integrated with and parallel to our regular design process that my instructional designers on my team and I follow to design courses that are not gamified. So it was an interesting conundrum. So we use the backwards design process at Brown University to design our online courses and blended courses. So we always ask, what do you want students to be able to know and do after your course is over or after that particular week is over? And then we do a lot of mapping to ensure that those things are happening. And we write learning outcome statements or even learning outcome questions. And so I had to kind of map these two processes together to make them work. And so I ended up using the worksheet that we normally use, but then embedding the other gamification design process with it. So we started with the what do you want students to be able to know and do at the end of the course. And then after we had that piece laid out, we decided to say, okay, well, like, what is the adventure and the story that this course can tell? And we had to brainstorm that first because that would help us decide how we wanted to segment the course. Like, what is it going to be called? Is it going to be weeks? That gave me a sense of, in the 16-week semester, like, what are these items going to be called and how are we going to segment the entire semester? And then from there, we decided to do a lot of analysis on who our students were and what would motivate them within this course. So we thought, are they high curiosity? Are they high achiever? Are they high saving? Are they motivated by beauty? Are they explorers that are going to be testing the boundaries of the system? So we looked at all sorts of different player type models and motivators.
These are the ones taken from the Reese profile, right?
Yes, that is correct. Yep, we did do the Amy and Joe Kim social matrix as well, in addition to the Bartle player types. So we kind of took influence from 3 different, but we spent a lot of time focusing on the Reese profile.
Okay, cool.
And so after that, then we jumped into the game mechanics themselves, saying, okay, now that we know what motivates our students, what's going to be the interesting game mechanics to make all of these pieces happen that tie back in with the storyline? And we did a lot of mapping to ensure that we weren't demotivating certain students. I think that was a really interesting piece as well, is not only do you need to ensure that your motivators are matching your students, but students can be demotivated. So for example, if you have a lot of group work in courses and your students are high independence but low interdependence, you can actually demotivate those students because they're not as interested in working in groups. Or if you have leaderboards, but your students are high interdependence, meaning they're about the team, they would much rather have recognition for their team, not individually. So there's really interesting components where you're trying to ensure that there's a balance across all of the various motivators for students. So we did a lot of work to ensure that the components of the gamification experience we wanted to build into the course would work for the types of students that were interested in taking this course. So that was really, I think, the bulk of the work, and also figuring out how are we going to actually make this happen. Like if you want to do a boss battle, what is that going to look like? A high tech, low tech solution. And we were able to simulate a lot of elements to make them seem dynamic, but they actually weren't. So, for example, status bar, you can build out 6, 7, 8 status bars and just place them strategically throughout the course to show that if you've gotten to this far, you have gotten this far. So it wasn't actually dynamically changing for each individual student, but we placed it in the location in the course which would simulate the movement throughout the course. So you can make some strategic decisions like that are very low tech, that enhance the experience and make it feel a little bit more high tech dynamic.
Wow, that's fantastic. Is there any more steps after that?
Yes, just one more step, and this goes back to our regular design process, but it's also part of the gamification design process, is how are you going to actually create dynamic learning experiences? How are you going to assess the student learning? So we moved back into our regular design process and said, okay, now that we know what students need to be able to know and do at the course level, and then we understand the various segments of the course, in that could be weeks, it could be modules. In our case, 1 week equals what we called a realm. So I asked my faculty collaborator, Professor Egan, I said, okay, what do you want students to be able to know and do at the end of this realm? And then how are we going to know, and how are students going to know that they're actually able to do that? And so we came up with some very dynamic, interesting assignments for students, and then tied those back to the game mechanics that we had envisioned. And obviously this is not all linear. It's very iterative. Like we were spitballing ideas about assignments much earlier and documenting them. But we wanted to ensure that we had captured those ideas in an idea parking lot, and or the various design documents we had. But then we formally went through and started vetting and said, oh, okay, there's like way too much in this particular realm that we need to scale back on. Or, you want students to try this multiple times throughout the course so that they can fail forward or experiment forward. And so Jim was very strategic about doing that.
Yeah, that's fantastic. And I still had a question that related to what you were mentioning before, because you also mentioned that he did before a non-digital and probably not even gamified version of the course. So is there any formal procedure where you incorporate that, or is it just blended into the whole experience? Because accounting for that experience that the professor has, because again, most of the courses, it's rare and it's very, very few, the courses that nobody's taught before that you're trying to gamify. So how do you incorporate that experience?
Yeah, so with Professor Jim Egan's face-to-face course, it was a totally different course and a totally different vibe. So I actually didn't have the opportunity to work with him to do the design for that course at all. He just kind of came with all this amazing prior experience, which had an influence on how he transformed this course. But what I do know now is he is retroactively going back and taking a lot of the inspirations from our design work and applying them to his courses, his face-to-face courses specifically. So he's specifically interested in a lot of the outcomes questions that we've worked through and thinking about what he actually wants students to be able to do, and doing a lot more lower risk assessments to help students build on various skills that he wants them to work through. But those are just tenets, I think, of great design and effective design, and not necessarily unique to gamification. But I just think that our work together has inspired that. And because my team, we work on supporting online and blended only, I don't get to work with faculty on their face-to-face only courses. So it's wonderful to speak with Jim when we're doing design and hearing what he's doing in his face-to-face courses.
That's phenomenal. And I just wanted to highlight the fact that it goes back and forth, that you both incorporated his experience from past courses, from past quote unquote regular or normal courses, and you incorporated it into this gamified online course. And then he realized new things about his own course and brought them back into this face-to-face program. Because again, gamification is not digital or non-digital. It's not a game in itself. It's all of these things brought together, and it can be high-tech, low-tech, or no-tech. So that's something I'm very happy to know that Professor Jim Egan is as well incorporating this into his classes.
Yes, he is. And he's really an inspiration. I think one of the most amazing things he brought to the table was that he knew his students so well. I mean, he saw them and their lifestyle and what they did and what motivated them so crystally clear that it was incredible. Like, I felt like I knew these students personally when we created personas. It was just amazing. He's taught at Brown for quite a long time. So it was wonderful to infuse that experience, and it informed everything that we did.
That's phenomenal. Just a quick break before we continue. Are you enjoying this podcast? If you're listening through a podcasting app, please subscribe and rate us on the app. This will be of great help to reach more engagers so we can change the world together through gamification. And now, Naomi, we are going to move into what we like to call sort of the second part of this interview, where we go for the quick questions and the quick answers, so to speak, on your thoughts on any of these topics. And the first one you probably heard before is if there's any element or there any characteristic or any best practice or something maybe that any gamification project you feel could benefit from. Is there such a thing for you, Naomi?
Yeah, I think it's been so interesting to think about all of the different gamification models that I've been exposed to and think about how story fits into them. And I think because story was such an important driver of the full semester course that I had designed. So I think it's really important for anyone in whatever way you're approaching gamification design is not to forget about the story. And I've been thinking a lot about how story can be implicit or explicit to the work that you're doing. So obviously there's a huge spectrum between gamification and games, and those I think are slightly different. But if you take a game, for example, like Monopoly, there's not an explicit story per se, but there's definitely an implicit story. You have the bank. You're taking themes from anything with real estate and you're bringing it into the game. And so I think that that's more of an implicit story. But I think that if you want to sustain a longer experience, you're going to need a storyline that's a little bit more explicit, which is, I think, why. Like, if we had just taken conventions of a story into the 16-week course, I don't know if we would have been able to sustain the students for that long.
That's an interesting learning as well that you took, and especially if you're teaching literature, a literature course, you have a large advantage in that sense.
Yes, I feel like the dream combination was just presented to me. Like, I just am so incredibly lucky that I got to work on that course.
And changing the vein of the question, Naomi, what would you say is your favorite game?
I do think that it came up in my bio, but I love Kirby so incredibly much. It's one of my favorite all-time games. But a close second is any trivia-based game. I'm not a very competitive person. That's not one of my motivators. But for whatever reason, Jeopardy or Disney trivia really just inspires me competitively in a different way than anything else.
It clicks in a completely different way.
Yes, it does.
Naomi, is there somebody you look up to, or you've followed, or maybe blindly, or so to speak, not too much heard of, that you would actually like to hear from in an interview like this one in Professor Game?
Yeah, I had thought about this actually right when I learned about your podcast. I was like, oh man, I hope X person has already been interviewed, but it's actually Rachel Niemer at the University of Michigan. She works with a gameful learning there, and she came and spoke at Brown this past year, and she's just incredible. They're doing so many interesting things at University of Michigan with gameful learning, and I was so inspired with her when she came and spoke.
Okay, so let's see how we can reach Rachel for a future interview. And in that same vein or sense, what would you recommend as a book to our listeners, to the engagers? Is there a one book that you would say, well, this book is maybe pure gold, or these are the things that I took from that book, and why would you recommend it?
Yes, the gamification of learning and instruction field book. I found the field book a little bit more engaging for me than the regular book, but that's by Carl Kapp, Blair, and Mesh. And that was my first foray into thinking about gamification design. And I think that Carl Kapp is just incredibly good at breaking down complex things into simple things and helping articulate the importance that if you're teaching process, you don't want to use a Jeopardy-based game, and that there's certain skills that work for certain games and structures of games, and then there's other skills that you can't teach using that type of game. Like this is memorization, recall and repetition type games versus process games, and where those things fall on the spectrum. So that was, I think, a really big eye-opener, and I'm so thankful that the field of learning is recognizing those things now and not trying to teach a process with Jeopardy.
That's a good learning from Carl's book. And would you say, Naomi, that there's a sweet spot that you have when you're designing these types of courses? What would you say is your superpower when creating gamification?
I would say I have to be the mapping queen. I love looking at the intersections of the various elements and ensuring that things are in sync and alignment. And then that allows for the creativity and inspiration because we feel like we have a really solid framework.
It's all prepared for the creative people as well.
Yes.
So, Naomi, we're going to go into a slightly sort of gamified kind of question in the podcast, and it's the random question that we get from our audience. So let's see what we get from here. Okay. So this is a high school biology teacher. So let's see what he or she asks. Says, as a high school biology teacher, I have seen many things come and go in my years of teaching. Gamification seems to be sticking, but how is it different from the other gazillion things claiming to be the solution to our problems?
Oh, that is such a brilliant question. And so I always view gamification as another tool in the toolbox. And I don't think that it's necessarily like the answer to everything, but I think that it's an important and compelling entity and design framework to use. So I don't think it's the answer to everything. Let's gamify everything. That'll fix it all. But I think that it's sticking for a very compelling reason. And so that it should be used as one of the tools in the toolbox. And we should interrogate like why it's working. And I think that a huge reason why it's working is because it looks at what motivates people. And people play games just because, and they want to achieve the next level, and they get into that state of flow where the challenge is meets their level of skill, or just the challenge is just slightly harder than their skill set, and you just keep playing because you want to. And I think that is an incredibly powerful thing and can be harnessed for learning, and it helps learning be fun. And I don't think that fun and rigor are at odds with each other.
Definitely. There's I think I've mentioned this before, that there's this phrase that my dad told me at some point, that people saw me as a very serious young man, but then I did theater at some point in my life as well in high school, and he said, that people were like astounded that I was this, all these characters and doing these crazy things because I was a very serious guy, and that having like a seriousness towards and taking things seriously, so to speak, doesn't mean that you have to do it with a serious and straight face all the time. It also means you can have fun. It also means you can engage with all these things. So I think that's an invitation actually to see life in through a different lens. And it doesn't mean it's not serious, it's not important. And taking something as a game, because people, when somebody's angry, says, "What do you think? This is a game or what?" So I think you have to flip the script in those kind of things, because I don't think that taking things as a game is a bad thing. It's actually, it can be a lot more engaging, and it can help us find the fun where there's not necessarily a lot of fun. And having fun in life is something that everybody is, I think, looking forward to when at least your basic necessities are covered. So thanks a lot for that answer. I do agree with everything that you said, Naomi. I have to say that's a very good answer. So regrettably, however, it's almost game over for this interview. But before we finish, I wanted you to tell us if you have any final quick advice for our listeners, and of course where we can find you on Twitter, Instagram, where we can find out more about your online course as well, if that's possible. And then we'll say goodbye.
Okay. Oh, it's going to be a sad farewell, but it's been a wonderful time here. And so quick advice for listeners is don't be intimidated by gamification design. It is incredibly accessible. And there are a lot of amazing frameworks out there. So take the dive, poke around, listen to examples of people doing great work on this podcast. I endorse the Sententia certifications because it was one that really resonated with me. And I felt that Monica and Jonathan, who lead that, broke down all the elements in a way that just made complete sense to me. But there are lots of other really effective frameworks out there. But if you want one place to start, just poke around on the Sententia website. I can't recommend them enough. And you can connect with me over Twitter or Instagram. I'm eLearnGeekette. And you can also email me at my Brown email. It's my first name and Naomi _ last name Pariseault at brown.edu. And yeah, it's just been a wonderful time here, and you are the most gracious host. I can't thank you enough.
Thanks to you for your time, Naomi. I know we were going back and forth about this interview, about the details, etc. And I'm happy that in the end we arrived to this day and to this interview, because it was a lot of fun. I think it was very educational and very relatable as well, because there's many people out there in a position similar to yours, or even professors who are thinking of doing some of the things that you do. And I think it's a very relatable thing. And as you said, gamification can be very accessible to all types of people. Again, high tech, low tech, medium tech, no tech. There's many levels and situations in which to apply it. So thank you very much, Naomi Pariseault. You and Jim Egan and your project were the receivers of an amazing award back in GamiCon in Chicago. I hope the success continues and moves on as well to your future projects. But now it's time to say it's game over.
Okay, I'll fail forward and try again. And level up.
You will for sure. Hey Engagers, it's fantastic to have you around. I hope you enjoyed this interview with Naomi, one of the winners of the GamiCon Awards. And I have to say that this podcast only makes sense with you. So let's connect on Twitter so you can let me know who would you like to have as a guest, what questions you have, what help can we give you, can we provide to you from here from Professor Game. You can find my Twitter account in professorgame.com/Twitter. And I'm always sharing content on gamification, especially around education. And hey, don't click continue just yet. Do you want to know what is going on in the world of gamification in Sweden with Jan Bittner? Then subscribe using your favorite podcast app and listen to the next episode of Professor Game. See you there!